So what were some of the problems during the time of the Articles of Confederation? And again, this brings up some questions of historical methodology, because we don't want to do a couple of things, make a couple of mistakes that are common. One, as I mentioned last time, is the nirvana fallacy, to compare something to perfection and show that obviously, since it doesn't meet that standard, that it was inadequate, and then replace it with something else that isn't held to the same standard. And number two, when people study the Articles at all, remember that it's a time period and a document that is little is known about, but anything that is studied about it, because of the limited time, I believe, in a class to teach something like this, and the limited importance and number of years, when it is studied at all, it's usually taken from critiques only of the Articles of Confederation from the time. For example, James Madison's Vices of the Political System. Now imagine 100 years from now that the only history somebody got about Barack Obama or George Bush or Donald Trump was all just written critiques about them from others. Now that would provide some information, but it wouldn't provide necessarily the whole story if that's all that you read as historical information about the time. It's kind of like when the study of Lincoln, people go back, and often historians, so-called, go back, and all they read to say, what Lincoln's views were, things were documents from pamphlets of the Republican Party at the time. Well, that's only going to give you a certain perspective. It's not going to give you everything. It's going to give you a positive perspective, as writing, critiquing things is going to give a negative perspective. So, for example, James Madison's Vices of the Political System critique the Articles and talk about some problems it had. And it doesn't mean that his critique is totally wrong or invalid, but it means that if that's the only part that we study, we're going to run into some problems. And so two books, one of the major things that was brought up during the time of the Articles of Confederation is this one, The Collective Action Under the Articles of Confederation. And this one is more of an economic history, which is interesting because it deals with the problem of the fact that one of the complaints against the Articles was that taxation was voluntary. The Congress, under the Articles, could request taxes from the state, and the states could accept or deny. And then if they accepted, they would choose to tax their own people and then send the money. Very slow, very inefficient system. However, a very limiting system on the Congress. Now, one of the assumptions is that the Congress never had enough money, but that's true of any Congress from their perspective, is they never have enough money. So one of the questions that's asked in this book, the Collective Action Under the Articles of Confederation, is the states gave a surprising amount of money, even though they were in debt from the war, even though there was a shortage of silver and gold, the money to pay the debts was lacking in some cases. But the states actually gave more than what might be expected. And for that reason, Keith Doherty, who writes this book, says the question is not, why didn't the states give? That would be like, why don't you donate to this cause? Well, if you don't donate, the idea is that it would be undersupplied. But his question is, on the other side, why did the states give it all? Why did they give in the amounts that they gave? And was this possibly effective? There actually are some defenses of the Articles of Confederation, of this taxation system, that say that there could be revenue supplied, it could keep government limited, and could be a possibility rather than direct taxation, which will happen under the Constitution. And the Constitution will allow for an amount of taxation on everything, including tea. There's a huge list of these items that Britain never dreamed of. So this limitation on the taxing power, while it might have been frustrating to those in government or wanting more, believing that just a more efficient system would bring about a better result, but for others wanting to limit power, a centralized taxing system that's very efficient isn't necessarily a good thing. So the idea that the government's kept limited by the state's ability to deny payment is sometimes a good thing. Another book, Sheldon Richman wrote this little book called America's Counter-Revolution. It's actually more about the Constitution, but talks quite a bit about the Articles as well. And so some of these problems that were brought up are that there are some issues between states and borders, who possesses what land, conflicts between the states, things of that nature, and different currencies, difficulties with trade, slowness about paying off war debts. But a lot of states were paying on their own. They weren't paying through the method of the Congress of the United States. So these things are going on. And then there's one particular thing that happens that frightens George Washington. And that is one of the events that moves things forward toward the Philadelphia Convention, where the Constitution will be produced.